You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, a.k.a. Mali Docuvixen, Norman Richmond, a.k.a. Jalali, and joining us on the line from, as Che Guevara would say, from somewhere in the third world is Dr. Gerald Horne, the author of a brand spanking new book, The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow, and the Roots of American Fascism. And Melinda has something to say.
Yes, so we are on our July fund drive, our annual July fund drive. So, and I just wanted to encourage listeners and like the crucial need to support Black Power 96. There was an incident at Uru House, which is where Black Power 96 Studios, on Saturday, which was yesterday. Apparently there was an attack of a torch. Basically, was the red, black, and green flag that was flying over Uru House was torched. And the assailant had a military-grade flamethrower. Luckily, the community members were able to intervene and drove off the the attacker. But this just shows how, you know, we need ongoing support. And I think there's an investigation going on, but it's very, very new, so we will update people. But we really need your support. So I'm going to say this before we get into the Horne Report. Please go to your computers and type in blackpower96.org/donate and donate today. And also, if you are on the Cash App, go to Black Power 96. And then you also can call in your donation and call Sandy at the station, who's taking calls, 1-888-979-2796.
And let me say that America has always been the land of the tree and the home of the slave for people of African descent. And tomorrow, Dr. Horne is going to talk about the farce of July. That's going to be on, that's a 2-hour special on WPFW, 2-hour special. And I believe you're being interviewed by Dr. Greg Carr. Am I correct in saying that?
You are correct, Craig Carr of Howard University. And that's WPFWFM.org, 2 hours unpacking the farce of July. Also, I'm afraid to say, critiquing some of our friends on the left who have wrapped themselves in the U.S. flag. As I've said before, on the one hand, you have folks in the United States who purportedly are critical of capitalism, purportedly critical of imperialism. But when it comes to the leading capitalist and imperialist nations, speaking of the United States of America, they take a soft line. They think that the creation of the United States was a great leap forward. They never seem to tell us when the United States runs off the rails, when it becomes the villain that supposedly they would suggest that it has become. And so their analysis is incoherent. It helps to explain why we are on the brink of fascism, because I think that's where we're headed. We're about 2 steps away, I'm afraid to say. And you see this in particular if you have the stomach for it to go online and see the latest police slaying in Akron, Ohio, of a black man, speaking of Jalen Walker, is captured on tape. I mean, a dog would be treated better in terms of the number of bullets that's pumped into his body. A dog would be treated better than Jalen Walker. And once again, to make a critique, it's not enough to just suggest for those who are this farsighted that this is an outgrowth of slavery, the degradation of Black life stemming from slavery and Jim Crow. That's a step forward, but you also have to move to the next step, which writers, including myself, have done, which is to say that we've known for decades, if not centuries, that Black people did not support the revolt against British rule in 1776 that led to the formation of the United States of America. Black people did not engage in class collaboration and unite with their slave masters in helping to oust the antagonists of the slave master, speaking of Britain. And before any of these smartasses accuse me of being soft on London, let me ask you, does that mean the United States was soft on Stalin when they joined with Stalin to refute and rebuke its enemies in Berlin and Tokyo? In any case, when you fight a war and lose, which is basically what Black people did in the 18th century, you should expect to be maltreated and mistreated forevermore, unless and until you can turn the tables, which we began to do with the Haitian Revolution, which ignited a general crisis of the entire slave system, which we began to do when many of us, such as Paul Robeson, united with the socialist camp of the National Liberation Movement, which of Africa and the Caribbean, which put pressure on U.S. imperialism to retreat from the more egregious aspects of Jim Crow in the 1950s, but the price to be paid was the sidelining of our internationalists, which basically meant taking away one of our strongest weapons. And I think that this also calls for a reconsideration of those who have been considered our heroes. I have just read a biography of George Crockett, and let me go backwards in terms of his career, that is to say chronologically. Congressman from Detroit, along with John Conyers, judge in Detroit, helping to free Republic of New Africa militants who were detained unjustly by the Detroit police, lawyer in Mississippi during the bad old days of Jim Crow in the 1960s. Then let me leap over one category to get to the next. Lawyer for the United Auto Workers in the 1940s, before he was ousted as a result of the anti-communist purges. And now let me get to the to the second chapter in his life, because I know I'm speaking to people in the United States. I can't repeat this in chronological order. Lawyer for the Communist Party in the trial of 1949 that leads to not only the detention, the imprisonment of the leadership, but also Crockett himself was jailed as a result of his vigorous advocacy by Judge Medina. And interestingly enough, when Crockett went to Thurgood Marshall of the NAACP, a so-called Black hero, seeking support, because of course NAACP lawyers also were engaged in vigorous advocacy on behalf of their clients, Thurgood Marshall turned his back on George Crockett. George Crockett held that against him for the rest of his life, because Thurgood Marshall did not want to be associated with the radical left, which leads me to the other point, which is that part of the reason that we're on the brink of fascism right now in the United States is that the Republican Party, the party of the right, they do not shun those to their right. Matter of fact, their slogan is "No enemies to our right." The Democratic Party not only shuns those to their left, but oftentimes seeks to crush those to their left. Enough said.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black 96. I was cut off for quite a while, but I know whatever you had to say was on point. But I wanted to ask you, we're talking about fascism. What do you remember about the 1969 United Front Against Fascism that the Black Panther Party put on? That was back in 1969. They had a conference called the United Front Against Fascism. Do you remember that conference?
Not only do I remember it, but I was there. I mean, I'm not as young as I look, by the way. And I have to confess, however, that this was my first trip to Berkeley, California, where I wound up living. And I was taken by the sights and sounds of Berkeley, and I ducked out of the conference quite a bit. But now, since I'm doing this book on the Black Panther Party, I've looked at the records of that conference, and it was really a highlight of the Black Panthers' entire tenure. It brought together a broad array of forces. It lacked somewhat in terms of its organizing, to put it mildly, but it was really a great leap forward ideologically for the Black community.
With that Republic of New Africa, when they had the shootout in Detroit, I must confess, I was living in Detroit, and I remember the people that I was living with, they're no longer in the land of the living. General Gordon Baker Jr., they would not let me go. And I would have to say that the people from Detroit really had the question of security really protected me, because that would have been very adventurous for me to have been going to a conference like that. So I remember they were almost getting ready to punch me out because I wanted to go so bad. They basically says, "You're not going. You're sitting, you got the TV and, you got some albums here, entertain yourself. You got the radio, you're in Detroit, listen to some good music." And they refused to let me go. And there was a big shootout. So, and Judge, I heard you talk about Judge Crockett. He was the man that he let everybody out. You remember when everybody, I guess the state went crazy, didn't they?
Oh yeah, I mean Crockett. It really speaks well for Detroit that Crockett was able to do some of the things that he did. I mean, can you think of another lawyer for the Communist Party in the epical case of 1949 who goes on to be elected to Congress after being jailed during that trial for his vigorous advocacy? Detroit, it says something, I think, for Black people, since Detroit is the blackest major city in the United States and is in many ways the most radical city in the United States. It really says something about Detroit. As a matter of fact, I've oftentimes maintained that Detroit is the Haiti of the United States. That is to say, just like Haiti has been punished for being radical, Detroit has been punished for being Black and radical.
Well, we're in Detroit. What was the name of the doctor that was in Detroit? He actually delivered General Gordon Baker. He was a radical doctor. I think they burned his house down, or they tried to burn his house down, and he had a shootout with the I don't know if it was with I guess it was with the attackers. People, you have Google, so you can Google it, but his name was Sweet, Dr. Sweet, right? He delivered General Baker.
Oh yeah, he's a historic figure. Books have been written about him.
Yeah, Dr. Sweet, right. You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. You have any more questions, Belinda?
Yeah, I don't know where you want to start next. Do you want to go to Zimbabwe and the new parliament building?
Yeah, it's quite something. You should go online and see it. The Chinese interests have just built a new parliament building outside of Harare. And just like you see Cairo is building a new capital, Egypt is building a new capital outside of Cairo. Zimbabwe is doing the same thing, and that's also an economic development project. That is to say, once you build a capital and a parliament building, it'll lead to spin-off businesses, residences, restaurants, etc. And it's quite an edifice. And of course, I confess that I listen to the Voice of America, the U.S. propaganda network around the world. And when they did a segment on this new building, the whole segment focused on whether or not the Chinese builders had inserted bugs, surveillance equipment, so they can monitor what's going on. And then, of course, they made the same complaint about the African Union headquarters that the Chinese interests built in Addis Ababa. So these folks, you got to give them credit. They don't give up.
And you're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96, and we are in fundraising mode. And Dr. Horne, why should people contribute to Diasporic Music in particular and Black Power 96 in general?
Well, the reason should be obvious if you're tuned in. I mean, if you're oftentimes straggling through the parched desert that is corporate media, particularly in North America, I'm sure when you arrive at Diasporic Music, you feel that you stumbled onto an oasis of sweet sounds and penetrating analysis. So that's why I urge listeners to immediately, if not sooner, go to the phone and dial, what's the number again?
What is it, Melinda?
The number is 1-888-979-2796. If you're on Cash App, you could go to Black Power 96, and you also can go online and go to blackpower96.org/donate.
And Sandy is is womaning the phones. We have 500 Cuban doctors going to Mexico. Could you talk about the role, Cuba is a very small country, yet I think at one point, I don't know if it's still true, they had more doctors in the world helping other people than the World Health Organization. Is that still the case?
It's likely, certainly more than the self-proclaimed superpower due north of Cuba, certainly proportionately, if not absolutely. And this sending of doctors to Mexico is also of political significance because the relations between Mexico and Cuba are tightening, which is good news. In fact, one of the points I'm going to stress on the 2-hour special that was mentioned at the top on WPFWFM.org tomorrow morning, 10 to noon Eastern, is, I say this so much, I'm starting to almost bore myself, that these Black Americans really need to be more international. It's obvious that the correlation of forces domestically is not positive. I mean, as a matter of fact, what I'm going to tell these people tomorrow is that you should start carrying your passport with you whenever you walk outside your door if you see a spike in political assassinations, which I think we're about to endure in this country, because there's a lot of loose talk right now about killing political opponents, believe it or not. I'm serious. And not only leaders of and executives of the Democratic Party, but internally within the Republican Party, there are certain anti-Trump forces who I think are probably going to be offed, as we used to say. So this need for global alliances has never been more necessary, and I'm afraid to say never been more neglected.
And you're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. One of the things that I wanted to mention to you before we got cut off in the beginning is today is Fontella Bass's birthday. Fontella Bass was born in your hometown, same spot on earth that you were born in. And I think Fontella Bass, was she married to Lester Bowie, she had a little political consciousness, didn't she?
Oh, yeah. Well, as I probably mentioned before, maybe you've forgotten, is that the Bowie family, we lived in the same block in St. Louis.
Yes, sir.
The elder Bowie was a high school music teacher. My younger brother, Marvin, who of course played with Chico Hamilton and Elvin Jones, amongst others, from the time he was about 10 or 11, was in bands with Joseph Bowie, Lester Bowie's younger brother. I knew Byron Bowie very well, who was in my age cohort. And so, you know, that's part of my own personal history.
Fontella Bass was known for the great hit "Rescue Me." Yeah, that was her big hit, right?
Oh, absolutely. You have a very good voice, Norman.
He could sing.
You have any contacts where I can get a record deal? I would like to record before I go into the next existence, because I'm a materialist, so I don't think I can. When I'm down below, I don't think I can record. So, if you have any contacts, I like to record before I breathe my last breath.
I can get you a gig in Las Vegas tomorrow.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I've lost weight, and do I have to have vision, and do I have to dye my beard? Or I guess Eddie Levert in the OJ, you can have gray hair and still sing, right?
Yeah, you may have to get a Jerry Curl suit, but other than that, you'll be good.
All right. Is there any more questions, Belinda? Yeah, we have.
I don't know if we got to NATO looting China.
Oh yeah, that's very serious. I mean, here's the latest gambit by the imperialist countries. So you know that after February 24th, with the Russian intervention in Ukraine, the U.S. and its allies, they basically seized $300 billion in Russian assets. And it's unclear what's going to happen to these assets. And so now with the latest NATO meeting in Spain, they decided to focus more on China. And they invited to the meeting South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand to that end. And now there's worry in China that these countries may try to seize Chinese assets. Now, China, United States has borrowed maybe $1 trillion or more, $1 trillion, TR, from China, from the People's Bank. And this might wind up being the biggest heist of all time, the biggest ripoff of all time. If relations go south, the United States may try to seize all these assets, not to mention all the hard assets that China owns in the imperialist world, office buildings, hotels. I'm not talking about necessarily about the government, but Chinese interests. And this would not only be in the United States, but in Western Europe. But one of the questions is, why are Germany and France going along with this when their economies are so dependent upon the Chinese economy? I mean, I know why they're going along with it, because U.S. imperialism is the guarantor for world imperialism. And if you don't go along with U.S. imperialism, you might be out on a limb as a second-rate imperialist power. Ask Canada how that might work out. But still, it's rather astonishing that this is proceeding as we speak. And you are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Could we talk about the dozens who are dying seeking to enter the U.S. and the EU? Well, due west of where I'm sitting, speaking of San Antonio, Texas, just a few days ago, about 4 dozen plus Mexicans, Guatemalans, Hondurans, El Salvadorians died from the heat. They were packed in a truck seeking work in the United States, and the heat just overcame them. I mean, it doesn't take long. I mean, you oftentimes read stories about how a parent will leave a baby in the back seat of the car as they run into a store and roll up all the windows. They come back and the baby's dead. It doesn't take long to die from the heat, especially if you're packed in a truck. And then in Melilla, which is Spanish territory in North Africa, you have a number of Africans from the south, places like Senegal and Gambia, for example, who in the dozens, they just died trying to climb barbed wire fences from Morocco to get into Melilla so they can get to the European Union. And obviously what this bespeaks is the structural problem of imperialism, which elutes and plunders Mexico, Central America, Senegal, Gambia, forcing young workers to try to flee north to the United States, to the European Union, and then dying as a result, I can think of no worse example of the horrors of imperialist plunder and exploitation than what has befallen these dozens who have just passed away.
And Dr. Horne, could you talk about the resistance that is growing in Myanmar or Burma? And what is the current situation in Burma?
Well, as you know, there is a so-called military junta in Myanmar, in Burma. You might recall Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader who has been in detention for a few years now. Now, this is something where I'm going to have to call upon the analysis of the crowd, of your listeners, because I know that the imperialist countries are acutely interested in Burma because it borders China and it borders India. You need only look at the role that Burma, Myanmar played during World War II, where some of the most bitter wars were fought there. In fact, some of the most heroic efforts by Black Americans in the US military in fighting Japan took place in Myanmar, in Burma. And so we know also that the 44th US president, Mr. Obama, his last foreign trip was to Burma. This was after the election of November 2016. He deemed it so important. And of course, I connected that to the pivot to China, pivot to Asia. And now, according to the Financial Times of London, the military resistance is heating up to the point where the Financial Times said that don't be surprised if the military regime is toppled. Now, I'm no fan of this military regime, although I am an antagonist of US imperialism, and I'm worried that if the military regime is toppled, the new regime will be friendly to US imperialism, therefore unfriendly to China, and hastening the day that I just alluded to, whereby the imperialists will feel comfortable in looting trillions of dollars from Chinese interests.
And you're listening to Diasporic Music, and we are on fundraising mode. And I don't know how much we have received so far, but once again, could you briefly tell people why they should support Diasporic Music in particular and Black Power 96.3 in general, sir?
Well, you don't miss your water till the well runs dry, as the saying goes. And it would be a shame and a sin if, because of nonfeasance on the part of listeners who should know better, that they do not dial and pledge, or if they do not go to their keyboards and pledge. That's why I'm urging Mali Docuvixen to once again brief us on how that can be done.
Yes, I just wanted to shout out, we did get a donation today. Thanks, Sandy in Oregon, for your donation. And more people could donate. Please donate to the station. The website is blackpower96.org/donate. If you're on Cash App, you can send a donation to Black Power 96, or you could call in and call in your donation. The number is 1-888-979-2796. And yes, we have a couple of more questions. I don't know if we have time. We might have to leave it till next week, but do you have time to talk? Did we talk about South Africa?
Well, since we put it off from last week, I'll just mention briefly that the report on so-called state capture, this is former President Jacob Zuma, and his cronies looted billions of dollars from the treasury by looting entire cabinets, the state airline, etc. And what's remarkable is that his successor, Cyril Ramaphosa, is now in hot water because Cyril, basically after 1994, became a billionaire. And so he has this huge estate in the northern part of the country. And he's an aficionado of unique game and animals. And for some reason, he had millions of dollars in foreign currency stuffed in a sofa. He had gone to an African Union meeting. Thieves took the money. There's a question as to whether or not he alerted the police, because this was foreign currency after all, and that could be criminal. And so it doesn't look good right now, I'm afraid to say, for Cyril, because he's up for re-election to the leadership of the ANC, which means he has the pole position to become re-elected as president in the next election. And certainly doesn't look good for Zuma, who, as they say in the United States, is lawyered up. I mean, he's hired just about every lawyer in south of the equator. And so he doesn't want to go to jail. As a matter of fact, he's like Trump. Trump might be announcing he's running for president tomorrow, by the way. And he's announcing in part because if he's president, he feels he won't be jailed. And he can hold off the prosecutors until November 2024 and then get elected and then hold them off a few more years as he's in the White House. And Zuma has a similar plan. So stay tuned.
And thank you. And I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to Diasporic.